Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the lavish, the very contradictory, and I think fiercely debated world of John Singer Sargent. For a lot of people, Sargent is, well, he's the name, the absolute king of capturing high society, probably the most celebrated and prolific portrait artist of the Gilded Age.
And that reputation is, it's entirely deserved. But what's so fascinating here, and what we're going to get into, is that his status as the king of portraiture, well, it came tethered to constant controversy.
Right.
He could depict elegance, status, and this, intimidating, almost unattainable poise like absolutely no one else. His figures look polished, impeccable.
Untouchable, almost.
That's exactly, untouchable.
Yet the critics, and we're talking about the staunch traditionalists who were, guarding the old walls of art, they were often appalled.
Yes, appalled is the right word, or just scornful.
They saw him as too flashy, maybe too theatrical, and ultimately, too focused on the surface. So you have this towering artistic figure creating images that became like tickets to social immortality for the wealthiest people on Earth, while at the same time earning both adoration and just intense criticism for the exact same brushstrokes.
And that really is the essential paradox of Sargent's entire career.
Yeah.
He was an international sensation who stood right at the crossroads of art history. Think about it. He's bridging the centuries of classical tradition, the old masters, with all of the revolutionary ideas, the chaos, and the speed that were just bubbling up in the late 19th century. He had to figure out, am I a realist painter or am I an early modernist?
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and figure out how he managed that tightrope walk. How did he navigate that tension between classical precision on one hand and radical modernism on the other to really redefine portraiture for a new age?
Right.
We're looking for that uncanny ability people talk about, the way he blended the surface perfection, the shimmer of the satin, the aristocratic poise, with a deeper, sometimes really fragile human essence that just complicated the whole picture.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because you can't just dismiss him as a fashionable painter of rich people. That's too simple. You have to really analyze how to categorize him. Was he a true innovator? Someone pushing the medium and its, let's say, philosophical goals forward?
Or was he just a really, really good technician?
Or simply a master technician of the old ways who just happened to be painting subjects of incredible opulence? So I think unpacking that conflict between realism and radical modernism, that's the core argument of his entire professional life.
Okay. Let's unpack this and maybe start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because to understand the sophistication and ultimately the rebellion of his mature work, we really have to look at the foundations. Sargent's story doesn't start in the opulent drawing rooms he became so famous for. It starts with serious, disciplined academic rigor.
Absolutely. So John Singer Sargent was born in 1856, and though he was American, he grew up entirely in Europe. His father was a doctor who preferred a more cultured, itinerant life.
So he's steeped in European culture from day one.
Completely. Immersed in it. His mother, who was an amateur artist herself, really encouraged his artistic inclinations from a very, very young age.
And it seems like he wasn't just, interested in being an artist.
Yeah.
He had this profound ambition to be a master technician.
Yes.
And that ambition is what drove him at just 18 years old straight to Paris. He didn't just enroll anywhere. He went to study with Émile Auguste Carolus Duran, and he got into the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts.
And that move, that gave him an education rooted so deeply in the academic tradition. For anyone listening who isn't, steeped in 19th century art schooling, academic rigor meant a relentless emphasis on line, form, and precision.
Endless drawing.
Endless life drawing, mastering anatomy, and adhering really strictly to the hierarchy of genres. Portraiture, for example, was considered sort of lower than history painting. Sargent absorbed all of those rules, and this unshakable foundation became the technical engine of his style.
But the environment he was in, Paris in the late 19th century, it was a whirlwind. You couldn't be studying technical precision there without feeling this revolutionary shift that was happening in the streets and the salons. The whole art world was exploding.
It really was a time of artistic upheaval. You had the Impressionists, Monet, Degas, Renoir, and they were breaking every single rule the Beaux-Arts held dear.
Right.
They were rejecting that meticulous, polished finish of the academic world, choosing instead to focus on, ephemeral light, shifting color, atmosphere.
Those fleeting moments.
Exactly. Those fleeting moments captured on plein air, outdoors.
And Sargent's relationship with Impressionism is, well, it's complicated. He admired them. He was actually friends with Monet. But he didn't fully embrace the radical approach of, painting outdoors and dissolving form entirely. He was, at his core, a studio painter. He was focused on the human figure.
He was highly selective in his innovation. He was certainly inspired by the Impressionists' emphasis on light specifically, how light dances on a face or how it can capture the shimmer of fabric.
Oh, okay.
But he adapted that focus on light and color into the formal setting of portraiture.
Yeah.
He didn't abandon form entirely for atmosphere, which is what some of the more radical Impressionists did.
And this is where we see his unique ability to sort of synthesize art history. It wasn't just modern trends influencing him. He had this deep, profound respect for classical ideals. He was a historian of art as much as he was a practitioner, especially when it came to the Baroque masters.
Indeed.
Yeah.
His study of the old masters, particularly Diego Velázquez, was absolutely critical to his development. Sargent even made copies of Velázquez's work in the Prado.
So what was he taking from Velázquez specifically?
What he took from the Spanish master was I'd call it the radical efficiency of capturing personality. Not through painstakingly perfect detail everywhere, but with what appeared to be just a few deft brushstrokes.
Could you elaborate on that technique? Because deft brushstrokes sounds simple, but I know it's what sets the masters apart. How did Sargent translate Velázquez's 17th century technique to the 19th century fabric of high society?
It centers on a technique called a la prima, or painting wet on wet. You're trying to finish a section in a single sitting. Velázquez was a master of it, and Sargent brought it roaring back into fashion.
So instead of layering paint slowly.
Right. Instead of painstakingly layering color until you achieve this smooth porcelain finish, which was the academic ideal, Sargent laid down paint with speed and conviction. He'd use thick impasto for highlights on a piece of jewelry or the tip of a nose.
Drawing your eye right to it.
Exactly, it draws the eye. And then he would leave other areas, like a background or a swath of velvet, deliberately looser, almost like a sketch. And what that does is it makes the finished parts seem hyper-real in comparison.
So his early style is this exquisite, purposeful balance. You have the structural, precise discipline he learned at the Beaux-Arts. You layer on the modern color theories from the Impressionists, and it's all filtered through the technical efficiency of classical masters like Velázquez.
And his early goal was to transcend just being a good technician. He wanted to capture the subject's psychological essence.
That precise synthesis, the academic rigor mixed with that modern freshness, that's exactly what made his technique so signature and what allowed his career to just explode. His brushwork was, as you said, loose, yet incredibly precise. He painted details without them ever feeling stiff or calculated.
And this brilliance, it was quickly noticed by the right people. While his talent was just undeniable, his social network acted as a powerful catalyst.
Right, it's who you know.
It always is. His career really started to propel forward in the early 1880s, particularly after the success of his portrait of the American socialite, Mrs. Charles J. Corbin, in 1884. That success immediately earned him major commissions, like the Duchess of Sutherland. From there, his career truly skyrocketed.
And he quickly became the indispensable artist for the wealthy elite. Didn't matter if they were the titans of American industry or the European aristocracy. His work was seen as a ticket to immortality. When you sat for Sargent, you weren't just getting a painting. You were getting a monument to your status, your taste, and your place in history.
But this is where the genius lies, and it's why we remember him beyond just simple flattery. Because beyond the opulent robes and the polished jewelry, Sargent managed to capture the fragility, complexity, and even at times the loneliness of his subjects.
So he wasn't just painting social status.
No, he was hinting at the psychological cost of maintaining that status.
We see this so perfectly in the 1887 portrait of Robert Louis Stevenson. Stevenson, who is this huge public figure known for his adventurous spirit, is captured standing in a doorway, almost leaning away from us.
In a moment of repose, yeah. Slightly turned from the viewer.
It's a very unusual composition.
Deeply unusual. Sargent gives us this sense of quiet reflection and inner life. The author's figure is cropped, oddly. It's asymmetrical, which makes you, the viewer, feel like you've stumbled upon a private moment.
It suggests there's a complexity there far beyond the public persona of this swashbuckling writer.
He used the informality of the pose to suggest a deeper truth about the sitter. That was his gift.
But the work that truly defined his artistic voice, the one that forced the art world to pay attention and ultimately forced him to relocate his entire life, was not a quiet success. It was the spectacular failure and scandal of the infamous Madame X at the Paris Salon in 1884.
Oh, Madame X. This painting of Virginie Gautreau, she was an American living in Paris who was renowned for her beauty and her, um, let's say, scandalous reputation. This was intended to be Sargent's crowning achievement.
And on the surface, it's stunning. She's incredibly fashionable, dressed in this sleek black evening gown. The pose is stylized, lines are sharp, the colors minimal and bold.
But the uproar was immediate and immense. It violated all the unwritten rules of the salon.
Can you detail some of those specific societal rules that Sargent broke here? I mean, beyond just the dramatic pose.
Certainly. So the Paris Salon was, you have to remember, a fundamentally highly political, very conservative institution that dictated taste. Gautreau herself was notorious for being a professional beauty, a figure of society, yes, but a very controversial one.
So the subject was already risky.
Very. But Sargent's mistake wasn't just the overt sensuality of the pose, which was aggressive for a society woman. It was the original inclusion of a seemingly minor detail of the slipping strap.
The strap on her dress. It was originally painted, falling off her shoulder, wasn't it?
It was. And that small detail transformed the painting from a stylized portrait into something shocking. It symbolized a tension between propriety and rebellion, suggesting an undressing, a lack of control, or perhaps even a sexual availability that was absolutely forbidden for a woman of her supposed status to display publicly.
So critics were genuinely scandalized.
Oh, completely. By the sensuality, the exposed shoulder, and that sharp, almost seductive demeanor set against that stark, dark background.
And the public outrage forced Sargent to repaint the strap, right? He put it back securely on her shoulder, but the damage was done.
The damage was done. Gautreau's reputation was ruined, and Sargent faced such intense criticism that he actually left Paris and relocated to London. And yet that controversy, in a way, solidified his voice. It forced a shift in how people viewed portraiture. It wasn't just flattery anymore. It was now a form of psychological storytelling and even social critique on the constraints of high society.
And this period also showcases his absolute mastery of light manipulation. If we look at the beautiful portrait of Mrs. Henry White, a prominent member of American high society, she's captured in this large, intricate white gown. But what's so remarkable is the way her face is bathed in this soft, diffused, natural light.
It makes her look delicate, almost ethereal, but at the same time incredibly dignified. He didn't just paint the gown or the face. He made light a part of the personality he was capturing. It speaks to her character.
He understood that light wasn't just illumination.
No, it was structure and it was emotion. In Mrs. White's case, the light seems to filter down from some unseen source, emphasizing her delicacy, while the heavy, cascading satin of her gown emphasizes her wealth and her stability. This manipulation of light gave his portraits a sense of dynamic drama without sacrificing the vibrancy or the stability of the subject's character.
Yet, despite all this phenomenal success, all these commissions flooding in from both continents, the sources suggest a sense of dissatisfaction brewing within Sargent himself.
He was in a pressure cooker. He faced immense pressure to constantly innovate while also satisfying the rigid, and let's be honest, often vain demands of an elite clientele.
And that's the internal conflict that started to plague him.
Yes, he grew tired of being an aesthetic servant to the rich. He began questioning whether he was truly capturing the souls of his subjects or just painting their outward appearances, the elaborate costumes, the jewelry, all the symbols of status. And that realization, that dissatisfaction, is what spurred his next major artistic evolution, pushing him even closer to true modernism. That internal conflict, that exhaustion of flattery, it led to him actively seeking out risks and moving beyond the rigid formula that had made him so famous. He began experimenting more freely with composition, with color, and with texture. He was deliberately trying to convey personality and emotion with greater authenticity, even if it meant risking the disapproval of his patrons.
This is where that profound shift toward introspection becomes so dramatically apparent in his work. A defining example of this has to be his 1892 portrait of Elsie Palmer. We see a real departure from the formal, full-length high society setting.
The composition itself just shifts entirely. You see bolder, less traditional colors, these deep blues and soft greens dominating the background, giving the portrait a sense of depth without defining the space rigidly. And, crucially, the brushwork is much, much looser than the precision he used for, say, Mrs. Henry White.
She isn't rigidly posed for the viewer at all. She's captured, seated, almost casually, looking downward in a moment of contemplation or thought.
Yes.
This was a huge step away from the formalism of traditional portraiture. It feels like an exploration of her inner character rather than just her outer status. It feels like we, the viewers, are interrupting her private moment.
And what's more, his approach to light evolved dramatically around this time. His later works became much more atmospheric, focusing on the interaction of light with the entire environment and the psychological space, rather than just using it to model the subject's facial features.
A great illustration of that atmospheric shift is the 1897 portrait of Mrs. Carlmeyer and her children. The subject is placed against this dark, almost abstract background.
The background is almost monochromatic, just a deep, indeterminate space. And the setting sun or maybe a lamp casts these long, dramatic shadows. This means the painting becomes less concerned with rendering the physical, external world of the subject's home.
And more interested in.
And much more interested in the internal world of the subject. The light is used symbolically to highlight her emotional complexity and perhaps the burden of motherhood within that high society. Sargent was definitely moving toward a more nuanced, more introspective, and even symbolic approach.
And this shift connects directly to the massive social changes happening all around him, right? This sense of modernity accelerating into the 20th century. His move toward looser, freer compositions, like the stunning 1905 portrait of Mrs. James Whitcomb Riley, it reflected broader societal trends.
What kind of trends?
Well, the rejection of academic constraints, the questioning of traditional class structures, and just the sheer impact of industrialization on daily life. Art was reflecting that turmoil.
And this is exactly where the famous debate over the unfinished quality of his work really reached its peak. The traditionalists, the people who believed a painting had to look like a perfectly finished window onto reality, they criticized the visible brushstrokes as too loose, too unfinished.
They saw it as artistic laziness or maybe cutting corners.
They did. But Sargent had a profound artistic purpose for this looseness, particularly in the non-focal areas. This blending of finished and unfinished became a definitive hallmark of his later style. Let's take the classic example, Lady Agnew of Lochnaw from 1892.
Okay, Lady Agnew.
Lady Agnew is a synthesis of his entire career up to that point. Her face is captured in striking detail, the eyes, the expression, they are meticulously finished. But as you move outward to her hands, the cushion she sits on, the background drapery, they are rendered looser, almost abstract. The paint is visibly moving.
That tension must have been so jarring to viewers who were accustomed to those traditional, highly polished portraits. Why use that specific technique? What was the goal?
It's an act of modernism. By using that visible, almost spontaneous brushwork, Sargent is suggesting movement, expression, and feeling. He's intentionally moving beyond perfection. The viewer's eye is pulled, inexorably to the finished face, while the entire context just dissolves into atmosphere and light.
So the critics hated it because it broke the illusion.
Exactly. But the modernists saw it as him using paint as an expressive material in itself, not just a tool for creating an illusion.
And when he did choose to execute details, they were designed to tell a story. Speaking of compelling detail and storytelling, the portrait of Dr. Pozzi from 1881 is a masterpiece that uses realism for psychological effect.
Oh, Dr. Pozzi. A brilliant surgeon, a gynecologist, and a renowned intellectual. He's not just captured as a medical professional. Sargent captures him standing, dressed in this sweeping scarlet silk robe. It's a bold, almost flamboyant use of color.
He's presented as a figure of both elegance and intellect, but the sheer intensity of his gaze, coupled with that rich textural detail on the robe, suggests something else entirely.
An intimacy, maybe, even a theatricality.
Absolutely. The robe is not a doctor's coat. It's almost ceremonial. It references the cardinals of the Catholic Church or maybe even classical Roman attire. It's so dramatic. And that intense gaze suggests Pozzi is letting you, the viewer, in on something deeper than his role as a doctor.
Right, perhaps his reputation as this cultured, charismatic man of science who challenged all the norms. Its hyperrealism used to convey an aggressive, confident personality.
And this entire period of innovation and technical risk-taking wasn't happening in an artistic vacuum. Sargent was navigating the increasing presence of a powerful, cheaper, and much faster new medium. Photography.
Yes, the rise of photography in the late 19th century forced every single visual artist to reconsider their entire role. Photography offered startling, instantaneous accuracy. I mean, why pay Sargent hundreds of pounds for months of sittings when a camera could capture an exact likeness in minutes?
So how did Sargent's work serve as an artistic answer to the camera's challenge? What could painting do that photography couldn't?
Well, Sargent's loyalty to the craft remained strong because painting could convey the emotion, the depth, and the story that photography, at least at that time, simply couldn't. His answer was twofold. First, painting is about selection and emphasis. He could choose which details to focus on, like the face, and which to abandon, like the background.
And the second part?
Second, he began using these innovative, often aggressive compositions, unusual cropping, asymmetrical balance, and figures standing outside the traditional central axis to create energy and life. The fixed, central, rigid gaze at the camera just could not easily match the dynamic psychological realism Sargent achieved through that selective focus and dramatic composition.
And that's the core tension that really defines his legacy, isn't it? He was caught between the established traditional art world, which demanded perfection, and the new bold movements of modernism, which demanded expression.
And his success, his genius, lay in navigating this tension. He infused his work with modern sensibilities without ever fully abandoning the classical training that gave him his technical brilliance.
As his work evolved and became more psychologically complex, so too did the critique. The central criticism he faced throughout his career, often from rival academic painters, was that he relied too much on surface-level elegance, that he was sacrificing true emotional depth for sheer dazzling beauty and just flawless presentation.
And that is the most common interpretation of his work when you view it superficially. But I think we have to look deeper at his technique of idealization and how he used it not just for flattery, but for social commentary.
What do you mean by that?
Well, while he certainly idealized the female form, he chose to elevate flaws, turning them into symbols of grace or individuality. His portraits were never just beauty for beauty's sake. They were about capturing a social essence and reflecting it back to the viewer.
Let's go back to the stunning portrait of Mrs. Vernon. She's dressed in this opulent attire, surrounded by lavish drapery. I mean, it's everything high society demanded. But beneath that surface, Sargent's use of light and shadow creates an almost dreamlike quality.
That dreamlike quality is key. The lighting is diffused. The colors are muted, yet rich. And her composed expression suggests a certain aloofness, perhaps even a hint of isolation. She is beautiful and successful, but she is utterly still.
It becomes a subtle reflection on the loneliness that often accompanied high society's polished exterior.
Exactly. Sargent was a master of reading between the lines. He gave the patrons the beauty they paid for, but he left the critics and the discerning viewer a roadmap to the subject's internal world.
So if we revisit Lady Agnew, how does that psychological analysis apply to her? She is dressed in this elegant gown, yet her pose is described as strikingly casual.
That juxtaposition is the commentary. She is seated, but not formally. Her head is tilted, her elbow rests on the back of the chair. It's a gesture of relaxed familiarity. That posture tells us she is at once a part of high society and slightly apart from it.
She's comfortable enough in her own skin, or her social standing,
to defy the rigid formality expected of the aristocracy.
Yes.
And her gaze. Her gaze carries a quiet, almost melancholic quality which contrasts so sharply with the vivacity of her expression.
So what's that about?
Well, Sargent's work mirrored the changing social and political landscape of the fin de siècle, the end of the century. His portraits of the aristocracy, like Lady Agnew, became a portrayal of the weight of her social standing, the burden of being constantly observed and scrutinized. He was painting the emotional cost of that grandeur, subtly telling the story of women who were powerful symbols but were also restricted individuals.
Now, after 1907, Sargent largely abandoned portrait commissions. He was just exhausted by it, right?
He was, exhausted by the demands of flattery and the psychological negotiation required to paint someone's face for money. He sought liberation from those constraints, moving toward a more liberated form of expression through landscapes and figure studies.
This is so crucial for understanding him as a complete artist, not just a society portraitist.
Absolutely. His landscapes and his figure studies are fascinating because they allow him to embrace the spontaneity that his formal portrait commissions often suppressed.
And how are these landscapes an extension of his portraiture? What's the connection?
Just as he captured a subject's personality, he captured the essence of the landscape. His watercolors, in particular, showcase a mastery of light and atmosphere that he achieved with remarkable speed and spontaneity. He uses these loose washes of color, letting the white of the paper breathe through.
Creating an impression of light and air.
An incredibly vibrant one, yes.
We see this in works like the Fountain Velázquez and the Wyndham Sisters. The figures in the Wyndham Sisters aren't posed like statues, they were interacting within the space. The attention is less on rendering every architectural detail and more on using color and light to evoke mood and atmosphere.
Absolutely. The looseness that critics once decried in his portrait backgrounds becomes the primary technique in his later watercolors and studies. The Wyndham Sisters is a great example of this liberated expression because it's almost a group portrait, but it avoids all the traditional stiffness. The sisters are casually arranged, the details of their dresses are suggested rather than rendered fully, allowing the light itself to become the defining character of the painting.
Yet, despite his incredible fame and influence during his lifetime, his reputation suffered a pretty significant decline after his death in 1925.
Oh, it was a brutal decline. As the true avant-garde, we're talking Cubism, Futurism, Dada, and pure abstraction, as they dominated the art world in the decades following World War I. Sargent's realistic, polished style, even with its modern undercurrents, just seemed utterly outdated.
His idealized images of the wealthy aristocracy just seemed irrelevant.
Irrelevant in the face of radical artistic and social change, especially the move towards social realism and pure abstraction. He was really relegated to being seen as a skilled craftsman, but not a true innovator.
But not a visionary.
Precisely. It took years, decades even, for art historians to really reassess his work, to look past the subject matter and recognize his technical genius and his incredible psychological depth.
And today?
Today, that influence is seen everywhere. Contemporary artists who merge technical precision with emotional depth, who want to tell a story while still demonstrating incredible skill. They draw direct inspiration from his ability to balance tradition and modernism. He is rightly recognized now as a master storyteller who used the language of the old masters to comment on the anxieties of the modern world.
So if we pull back and just look at the whole arc of John Singer Sargent's life and work, a few key takeaways emerge that really define why he still matters today. First, his mastery was utterly defined by his ability to capture that surface opulence, the flawless exterior, while simultaneously revealing the inner complexity, the vulnerability, and the true psychological essence of his subjects.
Second, despite his foundation in that rigorous academic training, he constantly evolved and experimented. He integrated elements of modernism, including abstract suggestion and that experimental brushwork, into what was traditionally the most rigid and constrained genre, high society portraiture.
And finally, his enduring influence is just undeniable. His balance of technique and emotional depth, that exquisite tightrope walk between precision and spontaneity, it continues to inspire contemporary artists in both figure work and landscape, solidifying his place not just as a great painter, but as a crucial transitional figure in art history.
And that leads us to a provocative final thought for you, the listener, as you consider Sargent's legacy. We know Sargent felt profoundly constrained by the demands of high society portraiture, and we know that he had to adapt in the face of photography's rise, which threatened painting's monopoly on likeness. So, if Sargent were alive today, where constant self-image curation and digital media like Instagram, curated photo essays, or even TikTok have replaced the traditional posed society portrait, what modern medium beyond traditional painting would he use to truly capture the essence and the inner turmoil of a contemporary subject who is constantly performing their own life for a digital audience?
That's a great question. The man who mastered the society portrait in oil, how would he master the digital image, the curated selfie, or the transient nature of modern fame? What would he choose to paint, or perhaps film, to reveal the truth beneath the perfected filter? We'll leave you with that thought. Thank you for diving deep with us.